Manila, we are facing a very historic event, especially for those who have registered. Currently, we are 500 strong who have registered from different platforms, from different institutions, not just in the Philippines, but all over the world. Good afternoon. My name is Ramises Javier Casten, and welcome to Connecting the World. This is an international seminar series in which we will be introducing several key people from different parts of the world into introducing the key features that would provide the importance of being a citizen of this planet. This month, we will be introduced to how important diplomacy is. But this is not an ordinary topic about diplomacy. This is a topic of how important diplomacy outside the state is, the importance of non state actors and quasi state actors in the formation of modern day politics. Today is the United Nations Day, 24th of October, and it's important for us to know and to realize that before the UN could have even begun its duty, before its predecessor, the League of Nations, has provided its role in world politics, diplomacy has always been in the forefront of determining international politics since the earliest days of polities. We will be we will be joined by several of our entities all over the world, and in partnership with Lost Island, we will be giving you the best of the best minds from different entities from all over the planet will be discussing the importance and the value of diplomacy and its essence in developing modern day politics. We are joined today by several of our colleagues from different parts of the world, and this is hosted by institutions from all over the Philippines. We have the Don Mariano Marcos Memorial State University Political Science MSBO in Mid La Union. We have the Governor Alfonso D College Political Science Club, who is the official host for Northwestern Mindanao. We have Liceo de Cagayan University Licean Core Diplomatique, the official host for Northeastern Mindanao, and we also have the Sultan Kudarat State University Tacurong Campus Political Science Society in South Central Mindanao. We are also supported by our colleagues from the world, especially by our friends in the in the federal organizations of different in the world. This is a production of Ram Speaks in close collaboration and partnership with Lost Island. Before we start, we would like to invite everyone to like us on Facebook, Ram Speaks, follow us on Twitter at Ram Speaks underscore, and listen to our podcasts at Ram Speaks the Manifesto. To introduce us and to give us an opening statement, we would like to call on our resident expert for Ram Speaks, Mr. Hilmar Moriones, to give us an in-depth discussion of what our topic will be all about.
Ladies and gentlemen, panelists, contingent, professors, and to the ones who are spectating this webinar, a pleasant day to you and welcome to the program. Diplomacy is a subtle art, according to one famous academe in the field of political science. It prevents everything, especially the war. It makes some dreams come true, especially through negotiation. And it settles everything at hand through peace. With that, diplomacy makes and shape of how the modern politics it is. In this type of webinar, we can we can discuss all the different throughouts and tracks of how the diplomacy shapes everything around the world and shapes everything our modern politics so far. Everything is needed, everything to be discussed of how the diplomacy shapes everything and how the diplomacy creates everything. With the diplomacy, it is as the subtle art, the importance of everything about diplomacy is about to take on hand. With that, on this depth analysis about how the diplomacy shape everything about the UN, about the world, and about the modern day politics, especially here in the Philippines. With that, on the scope of international matters, modern day diplomacy is needed to be at hand and it needed to be discussed throughout. I think I think this webinar is the most important yet the most crucial part of this program. With this kind of endeavor, especially the modern day we are in struggling a pandemic, diplomacy is everything. Like what our president Duterte is doing something right now in order to resolve this pandemic woes. He using diplomacy to get vaccine, to get peace, and to get aids from other countries. He using diplomacy everything and anything. So with this kind of mark, I welcome all of you to this webinar titled "Diplomacy Beyond UN: How Diplomacy Shapes the Modern Politics." Thank you.
And that was Ram Speaks resident expert Hilmar Moriones welcoming all of you to this event. Now, without further ado, we will be discussing about the seminar. Many people are asking about my hair. Actually, I am as excited as everyone is. And for those who know me very personally, I always style an unkept hair because this is a mark of a very busy mind, a very busy person, and all. But without further ado, we will be introducing our speakers. But before that, I would like to thank our audience right now who are watching from different platforms, not just here on Facebook. Some of them are listening through their connected devices. Some of them are doing the heroic act of being connected to YouTube and inviting their friends to watch along. This has not been a call for academic discussion. This has also been a panel and an event for us to show our sense of duty to our fellow man, our fellow classmates, institution mates, organization mates, and above all, the spirit of what they call Philippine camaraderie or bayanihan. The background of our discussion, dearest colleagues, dearest audience, would focus more on the importance of non state actors. When we say non state actors, we don't focus only on the NGOs, we don't focus only on the organizations that are known all over the world. Here we recognize the role of entities, of parapolities and micronations, of international non governmental organizations, of even individual people, of states, of provinces, of cities, and their important role in developing international diplomacy for the betterment and advancement of politics. What we will be discussing today is nothing short of the typical fare, but only enhanced. Most of us would typically think of diplomacy as a topic that only happens between states, between organizations, between world leaders. But little do we know that effective diplomacy even happens in the forefront of our day to day lives, with our day to day community, with our day to day communications of our day to day colleagues. And to start with our discussion, I would like to introduce our first panelist for this afternoon. He has a lot of honors and accolades bestowed upon him, and I would not want to be the first one to mention that, but he is best remembered and often remembered as a forefront among his peers and colleagues in introducing the important role of non-state entities, particularly the micronationalists, as they are called, in providing an insight and an input in how important it is for all of us to become our own self-diplomats in this modern society. Let us welcome our dear friend and colleague, the President of the Federal Republic of Lost Island, His Excellency, President Yaroslav.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me first to introduce myself. My name is Yaroslav Mar. I am the founder and president of Lost Island, a global community and a global sovereignty. Our community was originally founded in 2008 and underwent a number of changes to finally become the Federal Republic of Lost Island in 2013. Today, it unites several hundred individuals from all over the globe, people of different cultural, ethnic, religious, and political backgrounds who are proud to call themselves Lost Islandic citizens. The subject of our today's webinar is Diplomacy Beyond UN. From the outside, it may seem that diplomacy is one of the most conservative fields of human activity. The diplomatic protocol today is pretty similar to how it used to be centuries ago. The embassies are still the same. And yet, something has changed. The 20th century brought more changes and innovations than the entire history of humanity before it. The first 2 decades of the 21st century brought more changes than the entire 20th century. We live in a world that is forever accelerating, and this acceleration has affected not only science and technology, but also human interaction. One of the most interesting phenomena of the last 2 decades is the so-called Uberization, named after Uber taxi and characterized by the disappearance of traditional intermediaries and market roles, which are replaced by peer-to-peer service. The most textbook examples of Uberization are Uber itself and Airbnb, which made it possible for those who seek short-term rentals to bypass hotels and real estate agents and communicate directly with the owners. But how has Uberization affected the world of diplomacy? Of course, the UN is still there, the embassies are still there, the ambassadors are still there, and yet they no longer have the monopoly they once had. Centuries ago, exposure to other cultures was limited. There was no internet, and traveling for pleasure was unheard of. Cross-culture communication was in the hands of those few who had the ability to interact with different cultures: merchants, occasional travelers, and of course diplomats. The concept of diplomatic representation was especially important because back in the days, the leaders of two faraway nations would likely never meet each other. A journey from Europe to China takes several hours today, but centuries ago, crossing the Silk Road would take several months, and to leave the country for so long would be almost unfathomable for any national leader. The advent of air travel, and even more so of the internet, meant that the crucial role formal diplomacy once had eventually began to dwindle. Our generation has more exposure to other cultures than any other generation in history. And today, neither we nor the world leaders have to rely solely on the official position of the embassy or the information we manage to obtain. For today, we have the ability to instantly connect to a person from almost any country, no matter how far away. The role of an ordinary person in politics has never been more important than now. And one of the most remarkable examples of this is the phenomena of Greta Thunberg. A teenager from Sweden, Greta inspired millions around the globe to campaign against climate change. There are also many who question her sincerity and suspect that she is being used by some shady forces who pursue their own goals. And it's true that Greta comes from an upper middle income family and is not precisely what we would describe as an average child. But without getting into the merits of such suspicions, and even assuming that they are true, let's ask ourselves, why did these forces find it necessary to send a 16-year-old girl to the UN? And the answer is because the world has changed. Because in the world we live in today, the voice of a 16-year-old girl often tolls farther than the voice of a man in a black suit and a tie. I assume one could ask me now what this has to do with diplomacy beyond UN if Greta actually delivered her speech at the UN. But let's be honest, the UN wasn't designed with 16-year-old girls in mind. And when Greta Thunberg speaks at the UN, it's not because she is the UN mainstream, but on the contrary, because the UN is trying to catch up with a world which is no longer so dependent on its services and invites powerful voices to speak in its premises. Greta was invited to speak at the UN because she became a powerful voice without and outside the UN and outside the world of formal diplomacy. And this begs the question, who is a diplomat today? Is the traditional definition of a diplomat as a person who is appointed by a country to represent it in another country still accurate? I would argue that being a diplomat today isn't limited to formal diplomatic service, because if we use the broader definition of diplomacy, which is fostering relations between countries and tackling global issues, then we have to admit that some of the greatest diplomats in history were not in the diplomatic service at all. Some of the names that come to mind would be Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, or Mother Teresa. These individuals did more to promote the images of their countries, the USSR and Albania, than the entire diplomatic service. Another important aspect we should talk about is cultural diplomacy, which is closely linked to the concept of soft power. This is where the United States are pioneering. America is where it is today, not merely thanks to its military or economic strengths, though these are certainly important factors, but also, and possibly more so, thanks to the enormous cultural impact of America on the rest of the world, primarily through Hollywood, but also through music, fashion, or food. The principle of soft power, to illustrate it by the American example, is that someone who is since early childhood exposed to American movies, American food, the American way of life, and of course to the English language, is far less likely to hate America than someone who had no such exposure. If we take any survey measuring the perception of Americans abroad, we find a clear correlation. The more people are exposed to the American culture, the more pro-American they are. And even in countries with a strong anti-American sentiment like Russia or Iran, we may see that newer generations who grew up on Hollywood movies and fast food are much more pro-American than their fathers and grandfathers. This is also why I believe the fears of China replacing America as the world's only superpower are exaggerated. Despite its economic strengths, China has a much more closed and reserved culture, which is not easy to export, and which is why it's losing to America when it comes to soft power. What is interesting about cultural diplomacy is that it doesn't have to be state sanctioned. Or, to be more specific, it's not diplomacy of states, but of nations. Greta Thunberg, whom I mentioned earlier, is not an ambassador of the Swedish state, but certainly an ambassador of the Swedish nation. Likewise, Malala Yousafzai, who is not a Pakistani official, is possibly the strongest voice of the people of Pakistan. The defining feature of this type of diplomacy is the direction in which it's developed, so to say. A government diplomat is appointed on top by the state and speaks to the world with the authority of the government that appointed them. A self-made or a cultural diplomat, call it as you wish because the concepts are very similar, speaks with the authority of the people behind him. And as I have already demonstrated, the latter is often more efficient than the former. Let's talk about another aspect of unofficial, so to say, diplomacy. I think we are all familiar with the concept of diplomatic recognition, the public acknowledgement by one sovereign state of the existence of another sovereign state. A state which is not recognized by at least one other state is considered a state with limited recognition. For example, both the DPRK and the Republic of Korea are considered states with limited recognition because they don't recognize each other. The Republic of Cyprus is not recognized by Turkey, and the State of Israel is not recognized by a number of states, mostly members of the Arab League. However, all these countries are UN member states, and the majority of UN member states recognize them. Some of the states with limited recognition find themselves in a far worse situation. The Republic of South Ossetia, which declared independence from Georgia, is only recognized by Russia, Syria, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Nauru. But some such states don't have even that. The self-proclaimed Republic of Artsakh, which is currently topping headlines everywhere because of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, is not recognized by UN member state, not even by Armenia. Such states are usually called unrecognized states. So, where do the states go to if the door of the UN is obviously closed? Well, as it turns out, there are options. The largest and most prominent organization of such kind is the UNPO, Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organization, which consists of indigenous groups, minorities, and unrecognized states, and aims to provide a platform to those who don't have an official representation. To name a few, Abkhazia, Catalonia, Somaliland, and even Taiwan are all members of the UNPO. But what is perhaps most interesting, some of the current UN members are former UNPO members, such as Latvia, Georgia, or Armenia. Of course, I would not go as far as claiming that UNPO membership is the main reason why they succeeded in becoming independent, but it's undeniable that a precedent exists where an unrepresented nation achieves full statehood. A similar, albeit much smaller organization is the so-called Community for Democracy and Rights of Nations, more commonly known as the Commonwealth of Unrecognized States, which unites four breakaway post-Soviet republics: Abkhazia, Artsakh, South Ossetia, and Transnistria. Two of them, Abkhazia and South Ossetia, have recognition from Russia and a handful of other UN members, while Artsakh and Transnistria are only recognized by other states with limited recognition. The third organization that I would like to mention is the Organization of Emerging African States, OEAS. Its members are not actually states in that they don't exercise control over the land they claim, but African independence movements such as the Rif Republic, the Republic of Cabinda, or Southern Cameroons. The prospects of obtaining independence and sovereignty are of course less clear, but I think if there is something that this year taught us, it is that we still have many black swans waiting to kick door. And finally, the third aspect of non-UN diplomacy that I would like to talk about is micronationalism. Some of you, I assume, might have heard already of micronations, and I'm the leader of a micronation myself, the Federal Republic of Lostisland. There is no universally agreed upon definition of a micronation, but in a broad sense, a micronation is an entity created by an individual or a small group of people which operates in the form of an actual state, has a government and government offices, but its claim to statehood is mostly ignored by the international community. The key difference between micronations and unrecognized states is that a micronation is, as I said, created and has a founder, while an unrecognized state or an independence movement emerges naturally out of the general populace and its plight for independence. The most well-known micronations would be the Principality of Sealand or the Republic of Molossia, and neither of them enjoys any diplomatic recognition from UN member states. There is a popular opinion that micronations never obtain any recognition whatsoever, because if they did, they would not be micronations anymore. But the truth is a bit more complicated. Meet the Dominion of Melchizedek. This micronation had been created in 1990 and was linked to a number of bank frauds. So let me be very clear, I don't consider it an example to follow. But what is interesting for us is that it actually managed to obtain diplomatic recognition from a number of African countries. It signed treaties of peace and recognition with Cameroon, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, and Nigeria. And in doing so, it actually went further than unrecognized states like Transnistria or Artsakh, which have no diplomatic recognition from UN members at all. I would like to reiterate once again that I'm not suggesting that the Dominion of Melchizedek should be considered an exemplary micronation. But what it does show is that the line between a micronation and a state with limited recognition can be blurry. The majority of micronations don't actively seek international recognition and are more or less happy with their present status. Often they are artistic projects, such as the case with Ladonia, a Swedish micronation which emerged out of a conflict over two installations by Swedish artist Lars Vilks. The Swedish authorities argued that these installations had been built without permission and have to be dismantled. In order to prevent this from happening, Lars declared the land in question a sovereign state called Ladonia, which attracted a lot of media attention to the issue. Eventually, a Swedish court ruled against demolition, and the installations still exist to this day. Some micronations are societal projects, like the ones that you founded, the Federal Republic of Lostisland. We claim symbolic sovereignty over Hunter Island in South Pacific, and in 2012 we arranged an expedition to it. The island itself is disputed between France and Vanuatu, but because our claim to it is purely symbolic, we don't take sides in this conflict. However, we do maintain that we are a global sovereignty, a community with its unique culture and identity which formed despite, or maybe because of, the cultural, political, and religious diversity of people who joined Lost Island and became our citizens. In my presentation, I covered different aspects of what could be considered extra-UN diplomacy, which I define as partaking in foreign affairs through non-conventional venues. Some people become social activists at the UN, invite them to speak at their premises because it can't ignore the impact that they play. Some people focus on advocating for unrepresented or underrepresented nations and peoples, and eventually they become full members of the community of nations. And some people, like yours truly, go as far as founding their own nations. Our world has changed a lot, and it keeps changing as I talk. And I would like to give an advice to our participants. Don't be afraid to experiment, to create your own communities, to focus on things that other people ignore, and to act not in accordance with the established norms, because the norms are changed by people who break them. Thank you for your attention.
So you have seen and you have noticed several of the discussions here. I believe President Maros already finished his lecture, I believe, and now we will be proceeding with our next discussion for this afternoon. But before that, I would like to greet everyone a good afternoon from Manila. And most of our audiences, I believe, are friends and colleagues from all over the Philippines and all over the world. Several here have mentioned their greetings, and I believe, President Mar, your a lot of people are very impressed with the way you spoke. They were asking me if you were Russian, and I was telling them, hey, questions will be reserved later at the open forum. So there.
Okay.
Yes. So again, let's give a round of applause wherever you may be to President Yaroslav Mar of Lostisland. Now to proceed with our next discussion. Before we proceed with our next discussion, let's before while we greet everyone, let's talk about another aspect of diplomacy. Earlier, Mr. Mar has discussed the importance of diplomacy, how it works and how it happens, and the role of micronations and micronationalists in building and formulating a world that is devoid of political conflict and whatnot. Now, we will be discussing now another important aspect, another important angle of diplomacy outside the United Nations. And this time, we will be listening to our second panelist. This second panelist of ours is quite another person from a different line. This friend of ours is not just a typical person that you might see, but he is also an international diplomat without the necessity of country credentials. He has represented an international INGO, and currently, aside from his accolades and honors received all throughout the world, he has also been known to be a very good champion of diplomacy, especially in the new generation. May we call on and may we welcome our second panelist for this afternoon, Ambassador Matthew Yngson.
Hi, good afternoon to the Philippines, everyone in the Philippines, and good evening to all of you, wherever you may be, and good morning if it's morning there. So, thank you so much, Ram, for that wonderful introduction. Let me just give everybody a little bit of brief of what I do before I go to my presentation, my short presentation. I hope I'll be able to talk about it briefly. So, as Ram mentioned, I do represent a few entities across the globe. Foremost, I'm Filipino, if you notice. But I'm also Dominican, Commonwealth Dominica in the Caribbean. So, in that particular aspect, I work for my main work, I should say, as a non-state actor, is working for a non-state actor, an international NGO called the Caribbean ASEAN Council, and which works together with the Eastern Caribbean Southeast Asia Chamber. So in essence, we connect the Caribbean countries with Southeast Asia and vice versa. So as I mentioned, we are a non-state actor focused specifically on two things that President Yaroslav mentioned, cultural diplomacy, and the other being commercial diplomacy, which is something that most NGOs and organizations such as chambers of commerce do officially. So, but we make those two activities together. We introduce cultures from the Caribbean to Southeast Asia and Southeast Asian cultures across the Caribbean. That is my main line of work. The other side, two other things that I also do on my free time is represent one of the countries where it has transformed from a micronation into what we call an independent state actor or an unrecognized state, which is called the Free Republic of Liberland. I will talk about Liberland in a while. And the third other activity that I do in terms of diplomacy is represent the Sultanate of Sulu. Many of you from the south are very familiar with this, and many of you in the Philippines are familiar with the Sultanate of Sulu in North Borneo. Now, we will not go into details specifically of what we do or what I do for the Sultan of Sulu, but I represent them, the Sultan Majul Kiram and the Sultanate of Sulu in the international stage. I am his royal ambassador as well as the Secretary General for Sultan of Sulu. And President Yaroslav mentioned the UNPO, and Sulu is already part of that unrepresented nations and peoples organization. So we will be continuing that down the road. But for today, beyond the UN is such a massive entity, and President Yaroslav already mentioned only a few percent of that outside of conventional diplomacy. But there's also something that we have to gather from diplomacy itself being conventional. Um, for many of you are familiar with the UN, there's one entity there that is not considered a state nor a state, a country by itself. It is officially a non-state actor, or I should say a state actor, because it acts like a country, but it's not a country. And I'm referring to the Order of Malta, which has status in at the UN as a permanent observer, which allows it to have recognition in more than 100 countries around the world and have embassies as well. But mind you, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta is it basically an organization, an order by itself. It's an order that has been around for more than 1,000 years, or so they claim. And because of that particular aspect, they are by itself recognized by countries, and they have embassies across the globe. But their only property are two properties around the world. In fact, they're just two properties. Malta, the Republic of Malta, which used to be part of that order, is no longer is an independent country by itself. So they have an office there, or I should say, a part of a palace, and as well as another building in Italy. And that in itself, Malta, the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, is a non-state slash state actor because it can do pretty much anything that a country can do: issue passports, have open embassies, and appoint ambassadors. So from that aspect, it is not considered a country because it does countries. Sorry, it does things as many countries does, but it also does not interfere. So it has a unique position in international community and international law. So beyond the UN, beyond conventional diplomacy, there are so many actors like the Order of Malta and many unrecognized states. So I will briefly try to share with you Liberland, which is the country I represent. I hope I can try to share it with you. Okay. I hope you can see it. So let me just try to briefly talk about it with a few slides, about 20 slides. So Liberland is basically a started out as a startup nation project or a micronation. But we don't consider ourselves, we never considered ourselves a micronation, but of course, on the basic basic consideration of how a micronation starts. So our founder, Vít Jedlička, who is a Czech politician, decided to claim a piece of land that is being, I should say, contested between Serbia and Croatia. So now, what makes Liberland unique compared to, I should say, other related projects is that we have already moved towards being an unrecognized state. And we have had so much progress since 2015 when it was first founded on specific ideas, which is basically libertarian. The founding philosophy behind Liberland is that we respect many other people, and we respect a smaller government. So this is Minister Walls, our Minister of Foreign Affairs. Now, we have also proved our case for both Serbia and Croatia, and the community in that area of the Danube River in Central Europe. So we've had research opportunities from different organizations, and as well as uh, purposely satisfying the Montevideo Convention, which allows us to have specific four articles, basically four reasons that make us existing in international law, make us exist in international law, which we have a territory, a population, a government, and we have the capacity to have diplomacy. So if you recall, for those Paul Sci students out there, the Montevideo Convention of 1953, if I'm not mistaken, allows this, which basically tells everybody that this is the argument for independence, or as could be considered as a state. So let us discuss the first part, territory. See, the official name is the Free Republic of Liberland, and our government is based on constitutional republic with elements of direct democracy. And the country itself is about seven and just a little bit over 7 square kilometers, just roughly bigger than the size of Monaco, if I'm not mistaken, or Vatican. It's bigger than the Vatican. And there has been more than 500,000, almost 600,000 plus people have applied for citizenship. But we have a very stringent measures. And out of that 600,000, only over 240,000 are eligible. So we have a very, very strict reason to become citizens. Now, it was proclaimed in 2015, like I mentioned earlier, and this is, you notice at the small map there, where the location of Liberland is. And people actually went to Liberland. The founders went there, and a lot of other citizens have already visited that land and claimed it for themselves. It is in between Serbia and Croatia along the Danube River. Now, what we intend to do, since this is a contested area, is that we are trying to push for more, I should say, settlement between Serbia and Croatia to be able to contribute. Mind you, no one lives in this land. There is nobody living right there right now, and in that area is a depressed area in the Danube River. So we, as a country, would like to make sure that this area becomes successful and becomes a part of the international community, and we intend that Liberland makes use of that. So right now, we have, like I mentioned, more than 200,000 people who are eligible for citizenship, but only a handful, less than 2,000, are actually citizens of Liberland. Not even 2,000, maybe just over 1,000. And we also issue our own passports, but they're specifically just diplomatic passports. Why? Because we want to increase the relationship between Liberland and recognized countries and unrecognized countries, and basically state actors. So to get a diplomatic passport, you actually need to be a member of the diplomatic corps of Liberland, a recognized member of the diplomatic corps, and even if you're just a citizen, you cannot get a diplomatic passport. So there's very specific. A step to become citizenship, to become citizen of Liberland starts with an e-residency card. An e-residency card is basically taken off from the concept of what the e-residency system developed by Estonia. So that's one step. You become an e-resident of Liberland, and then eventually there will be a route to citizenship. Now, we have annual activities. We have regular activities of Liberland. Among them is of course, the annual anniversary celebration, which we hold near Liberland, and we visit Liberland itself through the Danube River, and then we have the Floating Man Festival as well, which we did a few weeks ago in Serbia. Now, to properly emphasize what we are doing, that we are claiming this land as our own, we cannot develop it yet because Croatia has been policing or has been stopping us from developing that land, from putting up buildings there, etc. But the Danube River is an international body of water. So that's why we purchased two boats, Liberty and Bitcoin Freedom, that can basically establish our position right beside Liberland. So we have done that, and we've been doing that, and we will continuously do that until such time that Croatia allows us to build on that land. So among the other activities that we've had, we also have had uh, sports activities where we are some of our diplomats, our representatives supported our sponsors. We have our own cycling team. We've had a Miss Liberland in Europe. In my colleague in Indonesia supported the first Liberland Southeast Asia ice hockey team. So we have a diverse uh, sports and entertainment angle that supports our initiative. Now, a major project that we have done, which has crossed over to um, being recognized in diplomacy, is establishing an office at the Apatin Free Trade Zone in Serbia. Now, Apatin is part of an autonomous region in the Republic of Serbia, which has allowed us to establish our first diplomatic office in Serbia. The autonomous region of that part of Serbia is basically recognizing Liberland itself. Now, government, we have a president, like you mentioned, a vice president, Pierre Louis Vitel and Bogi Wozniak. So we have two vice presidents. We have a secretary of state, and we also have Thomas Walls, our Minister of Foreign Affairs. And sorry, can you still hear me? Ram? Okay. So the Minister of Interior. And now a major milestone that we have had is that we have had a recognition and an agreement signed with the Republic of Somaliland back in 2017. We signed a memorandum of understanding, and basically we recognize each other's passports. In fact, the diplomatic passport of Liberland, you can fly over to Somaliland and they will accept it. Another major achievement that we've had as a non-state actor or independent state actor is the establishment of a Rotary Club of Liberland in Sombor, which is in Serbia. Now, a major activity that we are doing for the countries that do not recognize Liberland is through the Liberland Aid Foundation, where we have supported countries such as Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And although we cannot officially say it yet, but these countries are moving towards recognition of Liberland eventually. Now,
I'm afraid I'm seeing myself on the screen. I'm afraid Ambassador Yngson is having technical issues, but I'm sure he will be back as soon as possible. We'll try to contact him as soon as we can. But for now, while we are waiting for Ambassador Yngson's statements and continuous discussion, we're just waiting for his network connection. The network connection states here 0/10, but we'll try to reconnect with him as soon as possible. Anyways, while we wait for Ambassador Yngson, we would like to greet everyone a good afternoon again. This is just a real and legitimate proof that we are indeed a live presentation. So for now, while we are waiting for Ambassador Yngson to reconnect, let's um, let's have first temporarily our third speaker while waiting. Oh, I think he's reconnected again. Yeah, the network connection is 10/10. I think that should work. Let's try reconnecting Ambassador Yngson while fixing this network details with our broadcaster. Again, my apologies for Ambassador Yngson for this untimely delay. For now, while we are discussing this, we would like to extend our gratitude to our colleagues and friends from different institutions. Again, we'd like to thank our friends from DMMMSU, Mid La Union Campus, Political Science MSBO. We'd also would like to thank our colleagues in Governor Antonio Ditan College in Tangob, in Mindanao, in the northern part of Mindanao. Daghang salamat kaninyo. And in north central Mindanao, we have Liceo de Cagayan University, Licean Core Diplomatique. Daghang salamat po kaninyo. And with our friends in south central Mindanao, the Sultan Kudarat State University, Political Science Society under the presidency of President Alia Biaca. Maraming salamat sa inyo. From our colleagues in DMMMSU as well, Mid-La Union Campus, led by our good friend and president of the organization, Marian Tadyar, ayan, Yamanak sa, for participating in this event. We have colleagues and attendees now currently covering people from all over the world. We have different audiences who are now also wondering as to what's happening with Ambassador Yngson. Ambassador, I'm not sure, but the network connection still states here that it's 1 over 10. Let me just go ahead and have a fix here. While we are waiting for Ambassador Yngson to connect, and while we attempt to reconnect and restructure our event, we'll have to wait for Ambassador Yngson. For now, we would like to hear your thoughts on the issue. Let me go ahead and check everyone who has greeted us. And Aljon Obales, AB Political Science, SKSU Tacorong. We have Merilix Janine Oriel, SKSU Tacorong Campus, AB Polsci 1C. We also have Roselyn Castillon, AB Polsci 4, Governor Alfonso D College. We have a lot here. We have a lot of friends who are watching with us from different parts of the country, from different parts of the world as well. We have a lot who has thrown in their greetings and said hi. We are watching and we're monitoring this, a lot of comments, and I'm wondering why, but sure. We have Elrish Kyla Bruna from University of Caloocan City. By the way, Elrish Kyla is one of our staffers at Ram Speaks, soon to be a staffer. And we'd like to greet everyone. Eden Grace Sumalpong, AB Political Science, one of Governor Alfonso Ditan College. And Andrea Morada from University of Caloocan City. John Michael Andrada from DMMMSU MLUC. Oh, I know this guy. We have a lot here. Angeli Angot, the president of the Political Science Club of the Governor Alfonso Ditan College in Tangub City, who said non-state/state. Cool. Okay. So I think that's cool. Now, without further ado, I think we've got word from our technical team that Ambassador Yngson is already back online. We'd like to continue with Ambassador Yngson's discussion, and probably he's on his way to wrapping up a few edges.
Okay, thank you so much, Ram. Sorry about that. I lost you. But anyway, I'll just have to recap a little bit about Liberland that I mentioned earlier, that while I was cut off, that one of the major achievements that we've had so far is the relationship that we are doing, or that we have established with the Republic of Somaliland back in 2017. So we have crossed over from just a concept of being I should say, a startup nation project, into being an unrecognized state. Somaliland, as you know, is one of the foremost countries in the world that has, in Africa rather, that has been democratically successful. Recently, both Somaliland and Taiwan opened their diplomatic representative offices in both countries, in both their capitals, and Liberland is moving forward to be able to talk with Taiwan. In fact, that's my personal project down the road. And it is a major achievement. As you know, both countries have limited or almost no recognition. With Taiwan, 15 countries recognize them as 15 countries of members of the UN, while Somaliland, there's only one officially. But unofficially, both countries have been recognized by many UN member countries. So, in that aspect, we as Liberland want to stretch over that and be a member of that table. Now, in my normal line of work as a non-state actor for the Caribbean ASEAN Council, there's that fine line of working together with non-state actors and government entities, and finding that opportunity to be able to inject uh, new concepts, like President Yaroslav mentioned earlier, is very important. We live in an age where the internet changed everything. Uh, 100 years ago, when the pandemic or the Spanish flu, many people died. Now, with the advent of technology, we are able to work from home, do these things, become diplomats, uh, talk to people from across the globe, from all over the world. That is something that has never happened. And a good example how we have achieved this is through the e-governance system that we have developed over blockchain for Liberland. So the entire Liberland country, the sovereign nation that we call Liberland now, is based solely on the concept that we use e-governance. All our diplomats are very well connected. In fact, before I went to this conference, I was already talking to some of them. We have a very regular WhatsApp group. Uh, we have a weekly call. We're talking about ambassadors and representatives of Liberland from across the globe. Similarly to my organization, the Caribbean ASEAN Council, we work with conventional diplomats. I was, in fact, talking to the ambassador of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to Taiwan just a few weeks ago. So it is very vital to understand that technology plays a key role in going beyond the UN norms. So I leave with you this thought of concept behind diplomacy. I was did not go to school in terms of going to international relations or political science. In fact, I was a computer major. Everything that I learned was self-taught in the last few years, and most of that is through technology. Most of that is through understanding the most vital, important role that a diplomat can be, which is understanding the other person at the end of the line. There you go. And I hope let's leave a few words, and I'll hope your questions. I'll look forward to them in a while.
And that was Ambassador Matthew Yngson of the Caribbean ASEAN Council, who also happens to share a lot of his thoughts and opinions about how diplomacy also transcends beyond countries, beyond culture, beyond our notion that diplomacy is mere formality, it's mere pen and paper. He has introduced us the importance of having the power of electronic diplomacy and the power of technology, the power of innovation, especially right now, the power of social media, as in the case with his entity as well. It happens that he also represents an entity that is quite new to the ears of our audiences. Aside from representing the Caribbean ASEAN Council, he also happens to represent Lost Island, which is an entity, but probably he will explain it later or he will expand it later, and we will be expecting a tough discussion about the importance of the emergence of entities the the Caribbean ASEAN Council, Lost Island, Liberland, and other entities in promoting diplomacy outside the United Nations. Now, our third discussant for this afternoon, before we proceed with this with the discussant, would like to greet everyone who is still with us right now. We have Marjorlene Lacson, AB Political Science from Sultan Kudarat State University. Omar Mamo, second year college, taking up AB Political Science at SKSU. Okay. We also have Michael Patrick Esperida Jr., second year AB Political Science from Notre Dame of Tacoron College. And Marsha Mamo stated us that I'm enjoying watching here. I have a lot of learnings as we learn here. Thank you for the opportunities. To be honest with you, before we proceed with our next speaker, I'd like to thank you. It's you. It's the students whom we all should take credit for. We all started this event because of a certain happening against us, against me personally, wherein I let's just say that something happened. Something happened that almost ruined my career, and apparently one of the students from Governor Alfonso D College in Tangub City, their president herself, sent me a message offering me support and telling me that it's not true, and apparently her words and that of several other political science students who believed in me has given us the inspiration to at least pay back. We are at a time of the pandemic, and as we are in the pandemic, activities such as academic discourses are deemed impossible to conduct and to take part. And through the Connecting the World series, we're hoping that with all other events, with all other activities, we will be very happy to join you and learn with you as we connect the world one event at a time. So yeah, Resha May Apollo still watching. Oh my, congratulations! We've received 100 messages. Wow, that's nice. AB Political Science 1B from Sultan Kudarat State University, Tacorang Campus, and we've got Riza Arigore, AB Political Science University of Caloocan City. A lot of our participants are from political science, and so it's timely that our third participant, our third discussant for this afternoon, our third panelist, is a part of a different kind of story. He's a political scientist par excellence in his area, but aside from that, he also has a major role as, for those of you who are watching, the chief administrator of the Political Science Hugo Society, the I believe the only, arguably, a political science page dedicated not just to political discourse and discussion, but also to political memes. Let us introduce our third panelist for this afternoon. He is a political science graduate of Father Saturnino Urios University in Mindanao, in northern Mindanao, northeastern Mindanao to be exact. And he has also been one of the dynamic leaders of the quote unquote young political science members, or young political science leaders of his generation, leading the political science Hugo Society stuff. Being a resident analyst at RAM Speaks is tougher. So let's introduce, without further ado, no other than the Chief Administrator of Political Science Hugo Society, Mr. Antonio Jason Fabe.
Lang, can you hear me? So let me introduce myself before I proceed to my discussion. Is I am Antonio Jason Babi from Butuan City, and regularly I'm now reside in Loreto, Agusan del Sur for my work as a community facilitator assistant in this WD. So now is let us remind you that today is the celebration of the 75th foundation anniversary of the United Nations. So in 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 due to that celebration, I discuss about the diplomacy and the history of how diplomacy came in this world. So diplomacy is defined as the art of negotiation, or other says that it is a sending lies to other countries. Then diplomacy is what, according to Ambassador Manalo, said that diplomacy is started when the snake tricked Eve to eat the fruit of knowledge. Then that is why the diplomacy, or being diplomat, is the oldest profession in the world that we have. So now the ability and practice of diplomacy is one of the defining elements of the state. And the diplomacy has been practiced since the formation of the first day city-state. So remember, the first city-state in the Italy, the Principalia, and the other description of what Niccolo Machiavelli said in this book, The Prince. So originally, diplomats were sent only for specific negotiations and would return immediately after their mission concluded. So diplomats were were usually relatives of the ruling family or the very high rank in the order to give them legitimacy when they sought to negotiate in the other state. So if you are being a diplomat on that time, you must be an elite, you must be an educated. Then now, like what in the foreign service now, that you must acquire a knowledge and you must be from a well-known family like other ambassador here in the Philippines, like Ambassador Emilio to the ambassador to the Spain, and the other have a appointed ambassador, and some are past this foreign service exam. At least you must pass the 5 exams. Then on the notable exceptions involved in relationship between the Pope and the Byzantine Emperor. So if you remember that the Pope is also a head of state and the most powerful and influential person on the in the medieval ages. With the first embassies being established in the 13th century, Milan played a leading role, especially under the Francesco Sforza. If you read the Niccolo Machiavelli, the Prince, you're familiar who is Francisco Sforza, and there is the main character that named Cesare Borgia. And this Francisco Sforza who established the permanent embassies to the other city states of northern Italy. It was the it was in the Italy that many of the traditions of the modern diplomacy began, such as presentation of an ambassador's credential to the head of state, which is that presentation of credentials is the tradition of the accepting state in how they accommodate the ambassador from the other country. Then the practice spread from Italy to the other European powers. Milan was the first send the representative to the court of France in 1455. Milan, however, refused to host the French representatives, fearing espionage and possible intervention in international affairs. As a foreign powers such as politics and in the accept of emissaries was recognized, and soon all the major power were exchanging representatives. So the first so on that time that the first using the diplomacy on the medieval ages is the Italy, and how they use the diplomacy into what we call this extend their national interest to the others and to influence and to gain power to the other land. Then and in Spain was the first to send a permanent representative, where it appointed ambassador to the court of England in 1487. By the late of the 16th century, permanent missions became the standard. So that is how the the ambassador came to be existent. The representation of the projects from state to state and etc. So many of the conventions of the modern diplomacy developed during this period. The top rank of the representative was a nobleman, and the rank of the noble varied in the prestige of the country who was posted to. Defining the standard of emerge for the ambassadors, requiring for they have a large residence, having a lavish parties, and that is what they call the diplomatic dinner, diplomatic, some also said diplomatic balls, and the other play important role in the court life of host nation. In Rome, the most important post for the Catholic ambassadors. The French and Spanish representatives sometimes maintain a retinue of the up to 100 people, even in the smaller post. Ambassador could be very expensive. Smaller states would be sent, receive, and envoys who were level below an ambassadors. Ambassadors from each state were ranked by the complex of codes precedents that were much disputed. States were normally ranked by the letter of sovereign. For Catholic nation, the emissaries from the Vatican was paramount. Then for those from the kingdom, then those from the duchess and the principalities, representatives from the republics were considered the lowest envoys. Ambassadors at that time were nobles with the little foreign or diplomatic experience and needed to be supported by a large embassy staff. These professionals were sent on a longer host country and other work as as what the head of state or the president or the king is to be ordered, and including some dedicated to the espionage. So that is the purpose of the diplomacy or sending ambassadors. That is in the theory of realism that the state is only a thing for the self-interest and not for the common or interdependence to achieve the common goal, but to achieve the personal goals or the interests of the state. And and through this, the embassies were met by the graduates of the university, and this led to the increase in the study of international law, modern languages, history at the university through Europe. At the same time, permanent foreign ministries were established in the almost all European states to coordinate embassies and their staffs. These ministries were still far from the modern form. Many had extraneous internal responsibilities. Britain had the two departments with frequently overlapping power until in 1782. These were early foreign ministers were also much smaller. France, which boasted the largest foreign affairs department and the full-time of with the 70 full-time employees in the in the 1780s. So the elements of the modern diplomacy slowly spread to the Eastern Europe, arrived in the Russia by early 18th century. The entire system were greatly disrupted by the French Revolution and subsequent years of the warfare, namely the the leadership of Napoleon Bonaparte in the France, who wished to make the entire Europe as as his empire. The revolution would see commoners take over the diplomacy of the French state, and those who conquered by the revolutionary armies, ranks of precedence were abolished. Napoleon also refused the acknowledge of diplomatic immunity. So diplomatic immunity is under the Vienna Convention in 1960. I think it's 1960 if I'm not mistaken, that the that the diplomats or the other consular representative is immune to the any case or not to be sued if they are doing in the line of duty. So Napoleon also refused the knowledge of the diplomatic immunity, imprisoning the several British diplomats accused scheming against the France. He had no patience for often slow moving in the process of formal diplomacy. After the fall of Napoleon, the Congress of Vienna in 1815 established the international system of diplomatic rank disputes on the precedence among the nations. And World War II, the rank of the ambassador became the norm. So the word ambassador is came after the World War II. So in the so diplomacy in this post World War II era is, as we can see, that it's many methods in how they extend their interest, their power through military, through economic. So let me discuss what is the powers in diplomacy and international relations. So earlier in this discussion, I defined what is diplomacy is. Diplomacy is the art of negotiation of two states. So in negotiation there are powers that most of the country or diplomat use. It's either hard power, soft power, or the sharp power. So if we talk about soft power, it is the use of economic power, aids, and exchange of culture. While the hard power, it is the use of force and threat. And the new one is the sharp power, is the use of propaganda, disinformation, and traps like what we call now what China to do to to extend the Belt and Road project, the that trap. So that is how diplomacy works. It is a work of, or it is the art of deception. It's just like a war without a arms or without a casualties in terms of life. Then then look at now the diplomacy works between the the Philippines and the other countries, that and it is show that the Philippines pursue the independent foreign policy. That's stated on the constitution, but now it is the more more difficult to understand and how to negotiate the other countries in terms of this time now. So that is my discussion for today. Then thank you, Ram, for giving me this opportunity, even though I am not I am not ready for this. So Ram, this back to you, and thanks for the time.
All right, that was Antonio Jason Fabe, Chief Administrator of the Political Science Hugo Society, our one of the largest, most respected, what do you call this? But the largest, most respected, and widely viewed political science quasi serious page in the Philippines. I believe Katuning, I call him Katuning by the way. Um, I believe Katuning's administrators have posted a vacancy, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not so sure if this is sanctioned Katuning ha, pero if this is sanctioned, they're looking for what do you call this? They're looking for participants. They're looking for people who would join their ranks as administrators in the page. So I'd like to call on all our discussants, all our panelists to join us in a roundtable discussion for this afternoon's this afternoon, this morning, this evening, wherever it may be. This today's event. So let's call on our panelists. So there are five. There are three of them, including Hilmar Moriones, who will be asking a to question or two to our three distinguished panelists before I go ahead and throw the hard-hitting questions. Um, in line with our RAM Speaks policy, we will be throwing neutral and critical questions that might severely be uh, not damaging. Damaging is not the right term for that, but might be more enlightening, or it would be more critical. It would encourage people to be very more critical. It's based on the format of NBC News' Meet the Press, wherein we do not bias and preferences would not be tolerated. So our panelists have been aware about this format, and they have committed to be very patient with me when it comes to throwing the hard-hitting questions on them. But anyways, Hilmar, I think you have questions for them, right?
Hello, hello panelists. Um,
Hello.
good. I have the two questions so far, but you can answer it all of three of you. And the first is how. What is your impression about the President Duterte's independent foreign policy, particularly in its approach to China and Russia? And the other one is it applicable to all countries, like even it's not the Philippines, but all over the countries. It is considered that the or the diplomatic policies should be one of the considerations for the voters for the next election or in their respective elections. Meaning, does the electoral candidate should or I mean is should the voters consider the proposed diplomatic policy or foreign policy of the electoral candidates when they vote for elections? Just like that. Thank you.
I'll go ahead and answer that question. But before I answer, I'd like to specifically say that this is my personal opinion and not the opinion of the entities that I represent. Just to be clear on that matter. It is vital. First of all, President Duterte came in as a non, as a local uh, official when he became president. He was never a senator first before becoming a president. So, from the objective of a national interest, came in a little bit during his term already as president and not before. So, international policy was never part of his platform. So, that being said, it does not necessarily mean that he has not done a good job. In fact, I kind of admire his uh, way of approach to international policy. Is it the best? Not necessarily. Could it have done better? Maybe. But just like any politician, there's always room for improvement. So, going back to your question, should voters consider foreign policy? It's a definite yes. We should always consider foreign policy in any society. Whether you are a Filipino or you're a voter, you should consider how your country would affect other countries. So foreign policy is very, very important. That is one of the major activities that we are doing at the Caribbean ASEAN Council, introducing how the countries that we work with have a relationship. A short example would be many of the countries in the Caribbean. I'll give an example. My own country, the Commonwealth of Dominica, does not have a foreign policy in Southeast Asia. It does not have any relationship nor an ambassador accredited to any of the ASEAN countries, any of the 10 ASEAN countries. So, that said, it's an opportunity lost for commercial, trade, tourism, and investment. So, all of that. So, it's very vital for voters to understand that it is also income for their country, work, investment. That's very important. So, that's my opinion about how the president and also how foreign policy plays a key role in the success of a country. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
So, all right, I think that was the opinion of Ambassador Son. I think I'd like to hear President Mar's perspective on that because we all know that uh, President Mar's home country, the Russian Federation, and its leader, President Vladimir Putin, are close ties. So, or so we believe with President Duterte.
Thank you. I am not Filipino nor very familiar with the internal policy of the Philippines, so I will not comment on the politics of President Duterte. But when it comes to the role of foreign policy and whether voters should consider it or not, my answer is definitely yes, because we live in a time where the line between home and foreign policy is getting more and more blurred, because the world is getting more globalized. 100 years ago, even 200 years ago, even several decades ago, it was possible to live in a bubble and not interact with the situation in other countries, to not touch it at all. But this is no longer the case. And now, even if you never leave your home country, you are still exposed to the situation in other countries, and you are still influenced by the foreign relations of your country more so than ever before. So, of course, it is vital, it is very important that voters take into account the foreign policy of the candidate they consider supporting. Thank you.
All right. Now I think let's hear Mr. Fabe's opinion on that.
Must rely on the independent policy. Rely, we must not favor for one superpower against the other, and favor the other superpower against the other. So it like be vis-a-vis or reciprocal or reception of the relationship, like a playing a cards between the state on how they dealing with it or to extend their interest. So President Duterte is have a good or enough relationship between China and the Russia, but but I must prefer to have friendship with Russia if I President Duterte, because as we can see, China now is so very aggressive. That's just like what in the news that we news or the other issues in the international politics that the China is making a role. So the President Duterte must examine the projects offered by the China, because I think it may lead to the death trap, and it may compromise the patrimonial asset of the country, and we must focus also in resolving the West Philippine Sea dispute, rather than go into the another project with China. So for now, President Duterte, for my opinion, must lie low to the China for the meantime in order and to settle the dispute. So in relation, and this question is the for the voters on what's the candidate foreign policy or plan in the international politics. So it is vital important, like what the second speaker said, that it is vital important us to know, because it can affect us. Economically, then in trading, etc. Because in what happened on the outside, it may have impact to us. So foreign policy is most important to see, and it's vital to the governance of the certain country, because Philippines is not a isolated country. After all, we are liberal side of the international law, and and we have a relationship to the other countries in terms of military and economic. Thank you, Ram.
All right. So before we proceed with other questions, there's a lot of questions here. Sai Saitado asked, "Sir, can we watch it again?" Yes, you can most definitely watch it. This video is available here on YouTube, and for those who has the link, this is not a public link. This is a private link. So more or less, only those who have the links can watch it. Now, Sai Saitado and all the rest who are watching here, you are eligible to obtain an electronic certificate from us. Just contact your officers on how you could get that certificate. Now, there's a question here from Anastasia Abba. Is it possible that the Vatican City or state belong to Rome, and how? President Mar, would you like to start?
Yes, sure. No, it is not possible that the Vatican belonged to Rome, because according to the Lateran Treaty signed between the Holy See and Italy, the Vatican City is the auxiliary territory of the Holy See, and it is under the authority of the Pope and the papal administration. So, of course, you can't connect, and the Vatican will not become part of Italy once again.
Yeah. Thank you, President Mar. Ambassador Ingson.
I will I will have to agree with President Mar on that. The treaty is very specific, that the Vatican or the Holy See is an independent country by itself. Uh, there are some factors, like for example, protection of is still under the Italian state, but pretty much no, it cannot be owned by uh, Italy.
Administrator Fabe. Katuning.
Yo, I can't hear them.
Yes.
Hello.
Regarding the question, that possible, or can you hear? We can hear you loud and clear.
Hello.
We can hear you loud and clear.
Ram.
I think he's having a connectivity problem. Proceed to the next question. There's a next question here on our end. Um, Here, what are the requisites to become a diplomat? I think since President Mar, Ambassador Yngson are not per se government accredited diplomats of the macro states or of the nation states. I think Administrator Fabe could answer that question. Katuning,
I can hear you.
my goodness, you can hear us. Probably you might want to ask my opinion on that. First, in order to become a diplomat, a good friend of mine, a good of ours, those who are in the political science field, if you're familiar with Ambassador, forgot the first name, but the last name's Jose. Charles Jose, if I'm not mistaken, the former spokesperson of the Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines. And the first basic way to learn to become a diplomat is to first study diplomacy, study the basics of diplomacy. Second is to take an accreditation course for career diplomats, and finally be accredited to the role of diplomats of a certain country. But I think our non-nation state diplomats, because they're basically diplomats per se, could also shed light on this matter. Let's start with President Mara about this.
Well, I assume the question is how to become a diplomat in the traditional sense of the word, which is an accredited diplomat representing a country in another country or in an international organization. And the traditional way is to, of course, to get a degree in the diplomacy, to maybe do an internship at your local Ministry of Foreign Affairs or a department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And if you succeed, there is quite a high chance that you land a job in some of the embassies or maybe in the central office of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But this is by no means the only way how people become diplomats. It is also not uncommon that an established expert or simply a famous person of a particular country is appointed a diplomat. For example, the ambassador of Azerbaijan to Russia, His Excellency Polat Bulbuloglu, is not what people call a career diplomat, a diplomat who graduated from a diplomatic academy and enrolled to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but a musician, a singer. And because of his enormous contribution to strengthening the ties between Azerbaijan and the outside world, he was appointed the ambassador of Azerbaijan to Russia. And there is another possible track, which is to become a honorary consul. A honorary consul is usually not a citizen of the country that he or she represents, but a local. It could be a successful businessman or an established politician or a social activist. And it is also not uncommon for people who obtain prominence in a specific field to become honorary consuls, honorary diplomats of some foreign country.
I would just like to add up on that what President Mar said. That's a very good example. The honorary consuls are mostly non-professional diplomats. They did not go to diplomatic school or did not take up diplomacy or international relations or political science. I have many of these friends here in the Philippines, as well as in other countries that are honorary consuls, and none of them are official. I should say officially graduated from diplomatic academies or related courses. Uh, I think the first requisite to become a diplomat is to have interest in diplomacy itself, interest in serving others. That is the primary requisite of becoming a diplomat. There are many levels, not just being ambassador or working for a foreign ministry. Um, there are many commercial diplomats. That is officially what we do at the Caribbean ASEAN Council. We are technically commercial diplomats. We promote tourism, trade, and investment in the Caribbean and as well as Southeast Asia. And also mating all of that with the Sustainable Development Goals. So, and most of my colleagues, in fact, all of our counselors in the Caribbean ASEAN Council are uh, I should say, non-educated in diplomacy. So, but all of us have the common goal to serve. And also, like what President Mar said, you could be a very influential person, a musician for that matter. In fact, Rihanna, which I'm sure all of you know, has been always an ambassador, or I should say, a diplomat, a cultural diplomat of Barbados, her home country. But it was only last year that the Prime Minister William Motley actually appointed her as an ambassador, an official ambassador of Barbados. So she is actually considered as Her Excellency Rihanna, her real name, um, and has a diplomatic passport. Prior to that, she was just merely a cultural diplomat, being a international superstar. So there are many ways to become a diplomat, and I think the first requisite is to actually be of service to others above yourself. Thank you.
So on the question on how to become a diplomat in Philippine foreign service, you must meet first the requirement for to apply a foreign examination. So in the foreign service examination in the department, there are five tests. First is the qualifying exam. Second is the psychological. Third is the interview. Third is the written. Fourth is the written exam, and the fifth is the final interview. So to become a diplomat, you must be ready. Take place in once a year, and also what earlier to set by the Department of Foreign Affairs. Before you apply that, you must have knowledge on diplomacy, international relation, international law, and the other aspect of foreign service. So thank you, Ram. That is my answer for the question.
Ram, yung audio mo, Ram. Nawawala.
So my audio was cutting in and out all along. I was trying to answer the question, but there. Can the United Nations possibly intervene if there is a war on a country and the government fails to protect their own people? Would anyone like to start? Even with the microphones, I wish to start with the answers, but in my opinion, as what I've said
I,
earlier. Oh,
I'll try to attempt to answer that, Ram. Um, the UN itself, uh, yes. Okay, the short answer is yes. Can the UN possibly intervene if there's a war in a country and the government fails to protect their own people? Many of the countries in the recent past, say for example in Africa, where there's a lot of insurgencies and warring factions, the UN came in with their blue helmets, which are basically different military representatives from different countries of the UN, to become Sorry, yeah, there you go. You have to remember that before the UN intervenes, there has to be a lot of process. It has to be approved by the UN Security Council, and also many members of the UN. So there's a specific reason for the UN to actually be intervene in such affairs. So it does not happen automatically. Thank you.
All right. President Mar, thoughts on this?
I would like to elaborate a bit on this. Yes, obviously it is possible for the UN to intervene, though the process is not easy. But I think the question would be more correctly phrased as should the UN intervene? Because more often than not, the UN intervention creates new problems in place of solving the existing ones, which is understandable because basically there is one more side to the conflict, which is likely hated by both belligerent sides. So I'm not actually sure that the a UN intervention is a viable option in the majority of cases.
So I think that's the point of our panelists. I'm not so sure if Administrator Fabe is still with us. Katuning, yeah, Katuning is still here with us. Katuning, how about you? Your thoughts?
Yeah, to might the what is the question again? Karam, the UN can
Can the UN hold on? I'll read it again. Can they intervene if there is a war on a country and the government fails to protect their own people?
so yes, it can if the certain state will seek help for the UN in order to so just like what the Rwanda side happened in Rwanda that there are they denied that it's denied that it is a genocide. Genocide is a crimes against humanity. Then the government cannot control that. But the UN decided that if that is a conflict or the civil war. So then if the certain country had can control the war or still control it, then the UN not intervene. But if it's not and it is the people have and etc. UN can intervene.
All
Thank
right.
you, Ram.
So there. There are a lot of questions from our audiences, but I would like to save these questions for future panelists as well. There are several questions here that are really adequate for a certain topic, for a certain personality. Aside from this event, this is not the end of the event, though. We still have other events coming through by November, December, January, February, and March. So that's 5 more months, and there's a lot of questions there. We will be keeping your questions, and probably we will be answering them on our post Connecting the World show, probably on Monday. So if you wish to stay to watch by and stay tuned, we will be posting that on this channel as well. But anyways, let's proceed with the hard-hitting questions. A certain question here comes from a certain Emeline Garma of the Cap College. It's a more or less distance learning school, and this question is directed only to Ambassador Matthew Yngson about Liberland. How do you even dare call the people that they are living there, since they are not recognized as a country? So are they considered as NPA, or in the Filipino street slang, no permanent address?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Citizenship by itself is not necessarily dependent on where you are. I'll give you a good example. I am a dual citizen of the Philippines and the Commonwealth of Dominica. I am officially a Dominican and Filipino, but I do not live permanently in Dominica. In fact, since I became a citizen few years ago, I've only visited a few times. Is that citizenship taken away from me? No, it is for life. If I probably do something bad, then maybe I go to jail, and then maybe through some court case, they may take off my citizenship. So it does not follow if you are there are if you get into the terminologies, there's jus sanguini and jus soli, which basically you get the right of citizenship whether your parents or you're born in the place. But you can also get citizenship by naturalization, which is like many Filipinos uh, I'm sure you're aware, go to other countries and they become citizens of other countries be, solely through naturalization. Now, for Liberland, it's also similar. Essentially, our applicants for citizenship, they get their way to becoming a citizen of Liberland if they support us, whether financially or otherwise, or to mere service. Like in my case, I never paid a single cent to become a citizen of Liberland, and I'm a citizen of Liberland. I have a diplomatic passport. That diplomatic passport is accepted in Somaliland. I'm never going to go to Somaliland. I've never been to Liberland itself. But because of service and because of naturalization, because of international law, you can become a citizen of a country, not just Liberland itself, but any country for that matter.
All right.
So, so there.
I think let's proceed with another hard-hitting question here. My apologies if I have to cut short the answers. There's a ton of questions here that I need to check on, but here's a very very serious question for all of us who are here. The case of paper diplomats. Uh, this is a very serious issue in which several people would masquerade themselves as ambassadors of peace, ambassadors of goodwill, ambassadors of certain entities, personalities. Um, I'd like to give several examples, but I'm afraid I'm beholden only to giving only a vague description of what it is for fear of being persecuted and prosecuted under the Cybercrime Act here, which probably might prohibit me from speaking names of entities. But paper diplomats, those who are diplomats who are basically trying to fake their way into becoming ambassadors. I've seen President Mar talk about this often in most of his platforms, in several of the discussions we've talked to, several of the posts that we've been interacting with, and I'm quite I'm quite certain because this is a very important topic for all of us, including for our audience, for our delegates here. This involves a matter of high importance, of high sensitivity, considering that diplomacy is at stake because of these paper diplomats. So I think with that, I'd like to ask President Mar's reaction to the so-called paper diplomats. President Mar.
Well, first of all, we need to distinguish between ambassadors, goodwill ambassadors, or peace ambassadors, because these are totally different things. An ambassador is someone who represents a country, maybe to another country, maybe to an IGO. It is actually accredited, has a diplomatic passport and diplomatic immunity. While a goodwill ambassador is the person who was basically appointed to be the face of some organization, which is of course not illegal per se. There are many noble organizations that have goodwill ambassadors, but we have to have it very clear that these people are, for the most part, not actual diplomats. They don't possess diplomatic immunity. And so how to proceed if we are not sure whether someone is a genuine diplomat or not? Well, if someone claims to be the diplomat of a country, it is all pretty simple. We check on the website of the embassy whether this person is actually a diplomat or not. If someone claims to be a goodwill ambassador, what we need to check first of all is whether the organization he claims to represent is legit, because some NGOs, and actually there are many such organizations, exist only on paper and exist for no other purpose than serving as a diploma and title mills. So we need to check whether this specific NGO is registered and accredited in any UN member state. And now that this is solved, we go to checking whether the person actually represents this organization or only claims to represent it. Likewise, usually this is done on the official website of the organization or on their Facebook page. So we have to bear in mind that the Facebook page is not always in control of the actual management of the organization. Cases happen where it is hijacked by a rival group or simply by an impersonator. So we need to be very careful, and we need to always rely on official sources when determining whether we are dealing with an actual diplomat, an actual goodwill ambassador, or simply a scammer.
So that's the opinion of President Yaroslav Mar. President Mar, by the way, is also very much against these people, these fake diplomats. I've seen him discuss with this many times with certain people, even confronting, even confronting paper diplomats themselves. Ambassador Yngson here, on the other hand, considering that you are also a diplomat for the Sultanate of Sulu, North Borneo, and you're also an economic diplomat. Do these paper diplomats have that could damage or hamper the diplomatic situation of our country,
Well,
no, of the world?
Ram, that very, very important that I've met so many of these paper diplomats. One of the things that I would like to advise everybody with regards to encountering these people, you would know that they are only, I'm sorry, I call them scammers, that they like to highlight themselves with so many titles, His Excellency, Doctor, PhD, whatever you have there. And then they put so many on their business card, logos of the United Nations, all the offices of the United Nations, all the agencies. Mind you, we work with the United Nations. Our organization works with the United Nations. We do not use any UN logo for the simple fact that you need a lot of accreditation for you to actually use any of the UN logos. That in itself is already a feat. So, it hurts real diplomats, it hurts non state actors, it hurts diplomacy in general. Because many of these people pretend to be diplomats when they have no idea of the base concept of diplomacy at all. So, much more the prerequisite of international law. So, we should be very careful and very mindful of people who are trying to uh, call themselves as ambassadors, as diplomats. Um, in my particular case, for the Sultanate of Sulu, officially, I am a royal ambassador. And if we are to follow the historical context given by Katun Ying earlier, most of the diplomats, most of the ambassadors started as royal ambassadors back in the day. And that is what I still do today. And just the other week, I was talking to the Chancellor of the Royal House of Rwanda, who is, in fact, a royal house in exile as the King of Rwanda, lives in the United Kingdom now. So we should be careful and be very mindful of these paper diplomats who are essentially scammers just by pretending to be what they're not to be.
There. I think Administrator Fabe would like to share his Administrator Fabe, Katuning, go.
So my insight for that existence of some they they what called some fakes and other diplomats. So the people should must know the fake diplomats or not. So by presenting some their credentials in how to credentials that may prove that they are a legit diplomat. So there are some in pastry some ambassadors from the certain NGO and etc. So if we differentiate that the two ambassadors from the NGO and the state is that the ambassador from a certain NGO is not covered by the international the Vienna Convention for Diplomatic Affairs and Consular Affairs, because in the consular affair in the Vienna Convention is totally talking about the representative of state and not the NGO, because NGO itself is the ambassador itself is a representation of the certain country to the other country to rely their policies, to rely their goals. So for me is that people should study international law, the Vienna Convention, in order to know or identify who is the legit ambassador or not. Thank you. Ram.
All right. So,
Ram, I'm just going to add a little uh,
go
one
ahead,
minute.
Ambassador.
Okay. So I'm just going to show you. This is a diplomatic passport of Liberland. Not basically, it's a real passport, including the usual stuff that we have. I don't show it around. I don't even use it outside of as an ID. It does not have any diplomatic immunity. It's basically as useful as a school ID because you can only use that insert in your school. So many of these people that are pseudo diplomats or are fake diplomats, they would probably go ahead and put this on their shoulder and showcase to everybody. Mind you, being a diplomat is very crucial. You could go to jail if you make a mistake. So, and that is one of the things that you should, especially for the students watching us here now, that all of these paper and scam diplomats, they like to show off who they are. Well, ask them one thing. Ask them to enumerate the Sustainable Development Goals. If they know all of it, explain it by heart, then they would probably have an idea of who or what they can do. But not even all of that. That's not even a guarantee. So, just a word of advice.
So, I'd like this is a very important question, and some this question is from the Sultan Kudarat State University, and it's directed to President Yaroslav Mar, clearly one of the undisputed leaders of the international micronationalist movement. This entity, uh, Lost Island, is one of the most respected micronations, most respected entities in the planet, to be specific, to be concise. So the question goes like this, President Mar: how these unrecognized states or micronations, together with the United Nations, deal with conflicts, especially when there are recognized states?
Well, there is a huge difference between unrecognized states and micronations. How unrecognized states deal with conflict, we can now see it in Karabakh, where there is a war, because an unrecognized state actually has authority over the lands that it claims. It doesn't have recognition, it maybe does not have any legitimacy whatsoever, but it does have power and it does have a population that it controls. While a micronation is essentially an organization, a fraternity, or a Freemasonic lodge, so to say. It is a club, it is something that actually exists, but it is not a place where people live in on their own. It does not have sovereignty in the sense of actually exercising it over the land and not over the people. So when there is a conflict between two micronations, usually it's limited to an internet fight, and it ends when one side blocks the other, so not really a big deal. As to conflicts between micronations and unrecognized states, I'm not aware of such precedents ever happening.
So I think that's that. That's a very serious happening, and in our case, that is something that we need to tackle on, especially with diplomacy, how modern politics is being shaped by these people. These people that we have here right now are just your typical speakers, if I may say so. Um, we got President Barr, who is undisputedly one of the most respected leaders of his generation, one of the most respected political thinkers among us peers, and of course one of the most respected leaders in the micronational community. We have Ambassador Matthew Yngson, who, aside from being a diplomat for Liberland, is also a respected diplomat by the Sultan of Sulu, which, by the way, is the oldest running sultanate in the world, or so I'm told, and also is a very distinguished career economic and cultural diplomat, of course. And we also have Antonio Dizon Fabe, so an administrator of a very prominent um, political science page. So the thing here is that this question rings a bell for all of us. Let's include, of course, our good friend and RS Permanent panelist Tilma Mariones. How do our style of diplomacy shape the modern politics of our nation? I think let's start with, on the order of appearance. I think we'll start with Hilmar. Hil.
Today, since the presume of President Duterte is in power as the 16th President of the Republic, there's certainty that we we already know about the diplomacy right now so much, especially in times when Duterte is secretly announced about his the separation to his longtime ally, the US, like that. With that, I already know how diplomacy or how the diplomacy shape our modern landscape of politics right now. With that, with that, the, the diplomacy has a big role in some certain areas, especially in project reformations and for the welfare of the people, like that. In that certain thing, it it make a crucial role, or it trigger the public opinion, like what the Facebook is doing right now, or what the Twitter is doing right now, especially when the president is doing some pronouncement about China, about US, about everything. Every move of the president as the chief architect of our foreign policy has triggered everything around us, including us, especially with affects it when it comes to affecting our internal affairs, like in our business and our economy, like that. So the diplomacy is needed to be like what you call this, as a special as a leader. You have to be accountable to your people. If you have a, you'd call this, if you want to pursue diplomacy, especially to the country which is not familiar to the people, you have to be transparent, because the people is trusted you, is trusted you as a leader, and you have to be accountable. You have to be accountable. All of the moves is not to be secret. It's not to be secret. That's why it is the most crucial part, voters, to consider diplomacy or the foreign policy projects of their electoral candidates in the next election, especially this coming 2022. So the realization, the most part of thing about the Duterte administration when it comes to diplomacy is about the um his approach to China, approach to Russia, and his approach to US makes some certain realization about, okay, can we can consider the diplomatic proposal or the foreign policy proposal of the candidates in the next election. So I think in the modern era of politics, where the diplomacy or the international politics is almost neglected, since it is, as we interpret it, not enforceable, or not forcible thing in our perspective. I think I think it is the role of us as a voter, especially, to the student of political science, and for the ordinary people who are watching this webinar, to see whether we can consider it or not, how diplomacy uh, play an important role in our country, especially us. We have sources like we have sources like that, but we can have our sources like we have ever dreamed of, which can requires diplomacy to have it to other countries. So I
All,
think this shop is your answer. This shop is your question so far.
all right. Thank you so much, Hilmar. So Hilmar is giving us the local perspective of how this affects us. President Mar,
Um, sorry, could you repeat the question once again?
how do our activities right now, us being modern day quote unquote diplomats, how is diplomacy nowadays, especially the diplomatic things we hold dear right now, shape future of international politics?
The concepts of international politics and diplomacy are very linked to each other because the diplomacy is essentially the practice of engaging in international politics. So the question might be a bit of redundant, but I think I understand what is the meaning behind it, and the question is how can we influence it. I elaborated a bit on it in my presentation. Uh, the ordinary person has much more power now than several decades ago. We live in a time where anyone can set up a blog, a vlog, a podcast, and start influencing his community, the society, the country they live in, and eventually the international community. An alternative is to become a social activist like Greta Thunberg did. An alternative is to become a micronationalist, which is, of course, a bit of an exotic path, so to say, but it doesn't mean that it's invalid. So today there are many ways how one can influence modern politics and affect its future shape. How to do it? Well, this depends on a particular person, on its interests, and on what goals they want to achieve and how to pursue them.
All right, Ambassador Inson, your turn.
I think President Maras already mentioned a big, great deal about this topic. I think we can move on to the next question.
So actually, that's the closing question for this discussion. So I think let's proceed with Administrator Fabe. Katuning, how about you?
What again the question? Karab, repeat.
Okay, the question is, how is diplomacy shaping modern politics, most particularly international politics?
Okay, so we're about the booming of the globalization, or now in the era of the globalization. Then the diplomacy is the most important thing people must aware of in terms of how how the Philippines have in relation to the Russia, China, or US. Because on what decision of the chief architect of the state is have an impact to the society, especially to the people who rely on the government. So on what? So the relationship of between the states is might impact have an impact us in terms of trade, economics, and 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 other aspect in the society. So diplomacy is the very important because it can affect the local politics, national politics of the certain country. If we don't have a good relationship with China, you have used hard power to sanction us, and it can affect it here, especially to the poor people and the other affected individuals. Thanks, Karam.
All right, Katuning, let's proceed. Let's go ahead and have the question of Miss Angeli Angot. Uh, say as a say what do you call this? As a cliffhanger. Hello, can any one of you elaborate diplomatic immunity? Is it true that even though the members of diplomatic corps violate a law of their host government, they cannot be tried in court?
At what? I can think again.
Can any one of you elaborate diplomatic immunity? Is it true that even though the members of diplomatic corps violate the law of their host government, they cannot be tried in court?
Okay. So Karam, then I just must recall on what the international law taught us because there are some years ago I forgot that topic. So immunity or diplomatic immunity is given to a diplomat for to distract their diplomatic duty. Then diplomatic immunity is vested on a diplomat by a Vienna Convention. So
Mm-hmm.
if a certain diplomat have can be sued if can be on a certain country not in the other country they have a duty. So if like the case in the Chinese a Chinese diplomat here that they have in the Philippines, then the Philippines decided to send the China and have a trial there. Thank you, Karam, and I hope that is a right answer because that is many years I forgot the topic. Thank you, Karam.
Well, in my own honest opinion, I wouldn't want to tire President Martin, Ambassador Yngson. They've been answering all the questions since the beginning of this roundtable. But let's discuss diplomatic immunity. Diplomatic immunity basically is the courtesy of a host government to delegates of another country to more or less uh, keep them immune. But the immunity basically is only dependent on several factors. One of which is if it's a minor misdemeanor, it's good as okay. You're fine. You're good to go. We don't wanna break relations with your country. So yeah, you're good to go. But there are some instances when, and I'm talking about the Philippine setting, not the foreign country setting, when there are diplomats who misbehave, they're usually sent back to their home countries and deemed persona non grata. So, or person not granted or person not allowed in the country. So that's the heaviest penalty that a state, country can impose on a diplomat of another country. But there are some instances that they also prosecute diplomats of other countries, especially if the crimes are serious and if the guest government or if the sending government also allows. So I think that's the end of our discussion. Let's provide with our synthesis first, and before we provide our synthesis, let's call on President Yaroslav Mar of the Federal Republic of Lost Island for the closing comments.
First of all, I would like to thank our moderator, Mrs. Javier Castan, for arranging this webinar, as well as the tech support group who made it possible. I think it is a very hard work, and it's great that we managed to unite here and discuss an important topic for today's state of affairs. And I have to deliver a statement that I wish I did not have to deliver, but given that Lost Islands that I represent is the official partner of this webinar, I feel that I don't have any other choice. Ambassador Yngson was announced as the representative of Philippines ASEAN Council. However, today he talked a lot about Liberland, the organization that he represents. I would like to make it clear, because the names are a bit similar and sometimes the confusion arises, that Lost Island is not connected to Liberland. There is no connection between the two. And as a disclaimer to our participants, I have to say that the founder of Liberland, Mr. Vid Jadlichka, was arrested by Croatian authorities, and there is uh, photographic evidence that he posed with the symbolics of the Red Cross despite not being a Red Cross official. So, from our point of view, at least some aspects of this organization are questionable, and we do not consider ourselves endorsers of this organization and their activities. Thank you.
So I think that would be that. That's for the sake of neutrality, and I think our colleagues would like to see this as well. Uh, Ambassador Inson will also
Mm-hmm.
be asked for his opinion. But Ambassador Yngson, I will be giving you 2 minutes for this. We are running out of time, but we will make sure that at least for the sake of neutrality here, we could at least make voice your opinions clear.
I'm just going to answer President Mar's previous statement. Yes, in fact, the first few times President Jedlicka was arrested when he founded Liberland early on. In fact, there were not just him. Many of the first few citizens of Liberland were also arrested by the Croatian police. Um, that has already been part of history. Uh, we are now moving forward. We are now being recognized by Somaliland, by the autonomous region of Vojvodina of Serbia. We have opened an office in Apatin, Serbia. We have two large boats along the Danube, and we have millions of supporters from across the globe. So I just want to say that Liberland is moving forward, and hopefully one of these days we will be no longer associated with the past. So that's the and every country has its history. We have just moved forward. Our recent uh, recognition came from the Habsburgs of Austria, and we gave them a the Liberland Order of Merit. So you know that's all I can say, Ram.
All right. So actually, to be honest with everybody, this is not. We are not initiating or promoting a fist fight here, but yeah, we as a as a moderator for this event, we are very much convinced that we are here. We may have different interests in mind. We may have different we have different sides of the prism, but we all share the same desire and the same interest that diplomacy, as we know it, can be promoted and strengthened, especially to our younger generation, and especially with our student delegates here who are watching us from all parts of the country, several delegates from other countries in the world. We are hoping and we are optimistic that uh, rest assured for everyone that we here are united in our common purpose and our common goal that diplomacy is an important factor in determining international politics. So there. My synthesis for this event is to thank everyone. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us in this discussion. But before I end this, I'd like to share a little synthesis with this. The events that unfolded, especially with those who watched this segment from the very beginning, has seen a great outpour of support, most especially from those who are in the community. So diplomacy is not just a mere decor. Diplomacy is not just a mere what do you call this, a mere privilege. And worst of all, diplomacy is not even a commodity to begin with. So we have to be very wary that our power as citizens of the world, to instill change and develop initiatives that could promote and prevent promote our interests and prevent conflict is necessary, especially for those who are watching now who may dream to become diplomats, or those who are members of the community, of the micronational community, of non-state actors, of international non-governmental organizations, of any of those who are present here right now, who are watching, wherever you may be in the world, your role is crucial and important in making sure that we live in a better place. So that's it for this afternoon, near evening here on our end. We'd like to thank all our delegates who have attended. Again, we'd like to thank them one by one. We'd like to thank our official host for Luzon, Don Mariano Marcos Memorial State University, Political Science MSBO, uh, Governor Alfonso D College of Tangub City Political Science Club for Northwestern Mindanao, Licean Core Diplomatique of the Liceo de Cagayan University as the official host for Northeastern Mindanao, and of course, Sultan Kudarat State University Tacurong Campus Political Science Society for South Central Mindanao. We also would like to recognize the presence of our ever-growing delegates from the University of Caloocan City, which not only sent student delegates but also sent professors as part of their delegation. Ma'am, sirs, professors, thank you so much for joining us in this event. And also, for those who are wondering if this is just a one night show, this is not. This will be permanently fixed here in our channel and will be viewed by the only those who have the link. So aside from that, we will be having other events as well. This November, we will be having more events. By December, we'll also have more events. And who knows, we can have one-on-one discussions with the members of the panel that we have here right now. So we've already got several messages from institutions. I'm sorry to say this, President Mar and Ambassador Yngson, but I think this is not yet over. We are uh, we are in fact invited to several other virtual events, which I do hope that both of you would be honored to indulge for them. So I think that's that on our end. In behalf of the unified international community, in behalf of all those who are here, in behalf, of course, of our panel of experts, of our speakers, of our panelists for this afternoon, on behalf also of the Federal Republic of Lost Island, our partner for this event, I'd like to say that, of course, first and foremost, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, listen to our podcasts, and of course, always, I'd like to introduce myself once more. My name is Ramses Javier Castel, moderator and executive producer of Ram Speak, saying that always remember that in diplomacy, nothing is perfect, but everything is negotiable. You are loved, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, good night. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that you have a great day wherever you may be. Mabuhay.